Will you turn with me in your Bibles to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, beginning at verse number 14. My brothers and sisters, for a few moments we have today, I want to preach from the subject, Take Another Look. Take another look.
Take another look, Courtney.
My brothers and sisters, the human brain is it's a marvelous creation. It is an absolute amazement the way that the mind works. Did you know that your brain was designed to help make learning easier for you? It was designed to help you be able to learn and retain information. And the way this works is, without you even having to do anything about it, that your brain takes new information that comes in and writes it over old information and makes attachments to old information so that your brain can learn and absorb things more easily. So that even while you are consciously trying to learn, your brain is subconsciously doing work to help aid in the learning process, to make learning more easy for you. One way to think about it, to see how this works, is if you can go back and remember math class. If you remember math class, and if you ever had to memorize the timetables. I remember having to memorize my times tables, and it was one of the things that I hated. I hated math, and so I hated having to sit there and memorize everything from 1 times 1 to 12 times 12. But once I learned it, I never had to do the math in my head again. So now, even if you ask me now, all these years later, what 6 times 6 is, I can tell you it's 36 without having to count it up in my head, because I memorized it, so it's a part of my subconscious now. And the reason they teach you to memorize those things is because when you get into more advanced things like algebra or geometry or trigonometry or calculus, that there's simple arithmetic that your mind can do without you having to put work into it, so you can save your conscious thinking and conscious learning for the advanced mathematical skills. Your brain has that information, and it's already there, so it can learn the new information and incorporate what you've already learned. This happens so oftentimes in life. If you've ever ridden a bike, there's an expression. It's just like riding a bike, meaning you can do it, and once you know how to do it, you can go back to it at any time. It is because once you learn how to ride a bike, that is a part of your subconscious and your muscle memory, so that you don't have to think about what it means to ride a bike. You don't have to think through the steps. You just get on, and your body acts seemingly automatically, but it's not automatic. Your brain is subconsciously sending your body signals to tell it what to do, so that you don't have to think through pedal now turn. You don't have to think through that. Your brain is doing that for you. And the reason it is so that when you're riding, now you don't have to focus on every move of pedaling. You can actually look and see, oh, look at the trees. The trees are beautiful. There's a car coming. Maybe I should stop. You can actually use your mind to think about the important things and not focusing on the regular tasks that you do all the time. It's a wonderful way that the human brain works, my brothers and sisters. But there's a downside to this too. And I experienced this when I was young. My favorite type of ice cream was Neapolitan ice cream. When I was a kid, I loved Neapolitan ice cream, because then I did not have to choose whether I wanted strawberry, chocolate, or vanilla. I could have them all. And I remember, my brothers and sisters, for the longest time, I thought Neapolitan ice cream was called Napoleon ice cream. And I never understood why it was called Napoleon ice cream. I thought maybe the 3 colors of the French flag had something to do with the 3 flavors or whatever. I never really thought through it. I just thought it was called Napoleon ice cream because my brain saw an N at the beginning and an N at the end and an E, a P, a L all in the middle somewhere. And so my brain said that word is Napoleon. Because I knew the word Napoleon, I did not know the word Neapolitan. And it wasn't until somebody referred to the ice cream as Neapolitan that I actually slowed my brain down enough to look at the word and realize that it wasn't Napoleon at all. It was actually Neapolitan. Because I knew something, and when I saw this thing, my mind incorporated what I knew onto it, and I never took time to see it for what it really was. We do this. We do this in life. We meet people and they remind us of somebody and we make automatic associations of them. Ruben Studdard is impacted by this for better or for worse. We hear Ruben Studdard, we see his physique, his persona, and the way he sings, and they draw comparisons to Luther Vandross, and they say he's the next Luther, he's a young Luther. And every album he comes out with, they are making comparisons to him and Luther Vandross for better or for worse, because we know Luther, and we're trying to think about how we think about this relatively unknown quantity in Ruben Studdard, and so we make the comparisons by associating him with Luther. But we don't just do this with celebrities or with singers, but we do this with how we live and interact with people on a regular basis. For better or for worse, on the good side and on the bad side, we make associations based on things that have happened to us in our past. If we've had particularly difficult or traumatic experiences, we have suffered because of somebody's anger or bitterness or animosity, whenever we sense or feel actions that remind us of that, we make all of those associations without really thinking about it. And there's a term that we've coined to talk about it. We talk about it as having baggage, but it's really not having baggage because we're really not carrying anything. It's just an unconsciously remembering what we have experienced and making those same associations. We do the same thing on the good side. If we've experienced love and warmth and acceptance, that any time we get into situations that look like it, we make all of those positive associations too. It's the way that our brain works, my brothers and sisters, that sometimes without even thinking or realizing it, that we are making these sets of assumptions and not looking at things for what they are. It's what happens. And it's not good or bad, but it's important that we realize it and recognize it, because sometimes we need to slow down and realize that Neapolitan is not Napoleon. Sometimes we need to slow down and realize that what we're looking at isn't the thing that we are associating it with. I heard you saying, Brother Preacher, this is good information, but what does this have to do with our text today? Well, I'm glad you asked. In Mark chapter 8, Mark is telling this ongoing story of Jesus in the wake of the temple being destroyed in Jerusalem. In the wake of the rift between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians coming to a fever pitch, where because they were forced out of the temple, because they were no longer worshiping together, now the Jewish community is isolating the Christian segment of it. And while this is happening, my brothers and sisters, the Jewish-Gentile relations are being strained, and there's difficulty as the church is trying to figure out who they are and who they're called to be. And as the people who actually walked with Jesus are starting to die off, there's a struggle to try to remember who Jesus is, who Jesus was, what Jesus was really about. So Mark is writing this gospel as a way of remembering or memorializing the life of Jesus. And in this passage here, right here as we are in the center of the text, the center of this move of Mark, from the baptism of Jesus to the resurrection of Jesus, Mark has these three stories that are put side by side. And we've talked about Mark doing this before. Mark does this a lot. We call it the Markan sandwich, where there are two incidents on either side, and in between there is something sandwiched, and it's a whole story that's meant to be taken together. You shouldn't dissect this story any more than you would go to Burger King or McDonald's, or hopefully something more healthy than that. I would say Subway, but they got yoga mat bread. But something, maybe you just go to your kitchen. Maybe that's the safest thing to do now, and you get the 2 pieces of wheat bread and some turkey or chicken that you put in between it, and you wouldn't look at the bread separately from the turkey or the chicken. It's a sandwich. You got to take the sandwich whole. This is a sandwich story. It begins with Jesus getting into the boat and talking to the disciples about the yeast of Herod and the Pharisees. And because we've been walking through Mark, you might remember that the Pharisees and Herod have begun to conspire together on how to kill Jesus. And so all of the conversations that the Pharisees are engaging in are a part of a way to trick and trap Jesus. They are asking Jesus questions and asking Jesus for a sign. They're trying to find ways to entrap Jesus. And Jesus has been largely ignoring or rebuking the Pharisees, but just in case the disciples aren't really catching on to what's happened, Jesus is trying to tell them in a way that they might be able to understand. Beware of the yeast of Herod and the yeast of the Pharisees. Jesus is trying to tell them that there is something going on, but the disciples are so caught up in their present circumstances, they can't see the larger picture that Jesus is trying to say, and they think that Jesus is chastising them because they have no bread with them. And Jesus has to tell them, no, I need you to take another look at don't you remember what we've just been through? Why would I be upset about not having bread when we had 5,000 people that did not have enough food, and we took a little bit of food and made it enough for everybody with food left over? Why would I be upset about food when we had 4,000 people? We had 7 loaves of bread, and I took the 7 loaves and I made it enough, and there were people. Why would I be upset? Take another look at what I'm saying, because you're missing the point. Don't let our present need cause you to miss the larger thing that I'm trying to talk about and do in this. Take another look is what Jesus is saying. At the end of the sandwich, the other side, the other piece of bread in the sandwich is Jesus having a conversation with the disciples on who is it that people say that I am. And the people have all kinds of ideas on who. Some say that you are Elijah. Some say that you are John the Baptist. They have all these people that they think Jesus is, because like Reuben stuttered, they really don't know Jesus. They know Elijah. They know John the Baptist. And so they're trying to cast Jesus in an image of somebody that they've seen before. You are like one of these people. Jesus says, you've been around me. Who do you say that I am? And Peter gets it. I don't know if he got it before this moment, but definitely in this moment, he gets it. Peter says, you aren't like anybody we've seen before. You are somebody different. The Messiah. Somebody who's come to usher in a new time and a new era. Peter begins to get it, at least in this moment. And in between these two discussions that Jesus has with his disciples, there's a miracle story where they bring a blind man to Jesus. And again, as we've seen Jesus have a habit, a custom of doing as of late, Jesus doesn't perform the miracle in front of the people. In fact, Jesus takes the blind man out of town. He goes out of the city and performs the miracle. And Jesus takes saliva and puts it on the man's eyes and asks him to open his eyes. And he says, "Can you see?"
Oh my God.
And he says, "Yes, I see, but the people look like trees." He can only half see. His eyesight is better than it was, but it's not what it should be. And then Jesus puts his hand on the man again, and it says the man looked intently, and then he could see. My brothers and sisters, this is the first time we've seen Jesus do a two-step miracle. When Jesus heals Jairus' daughter, Jesus speaks to the girl and she gets up. It's one step and the miracle's complete. When Jesus heals the man with the withered hand, he calls for the man to stretch forth his hand, and he does it, and the miracle's complete. When Jesus heals the lepers, he places his hand on the lepers and cures them of their leprosy. One step and the miracle is complete. Even the woman with the issue of blood, who Jesus did not interact with directly, but who bootlegged her miracle by sneaking around and grabbing the hem of Jesus' clothes, all it took was one touch, and she was healed. This is the first time the miracle doesn't seem to work on the first try, my brothers and sisters, and it leads me to wonder, was there something wrong with Jesus? Was he tired that day? Was he off his game? Was something, did it take extra effort? Was the blindness that difficult that Jesus took two steps? And I realized, my brothers and sisters, the issue wasn't with Jesus, and the issue really wasn't with the blind man. What is happening is Jesus is setting up a way of us understanding what's happening throughout this sandwich. Is that the first time the man sees, he doesn't see it all clearly. Kind of like us. We don't see what God is doing clearly, oftentimes. We see better than we saw before, but we're still trying to figure out this thing about what God is doing. I was having a conversation, brothers and sisters, this last week. I was in New York. I was visiting with my pastor for most of the week, and he and I were talking, and we were kind of talking about preaching and pastoring, and he was asking me how long I've been here, and I said, it's been 4 years at this church, and it was about 4 years at the church before, so this is my 8th year of pastoring, and he was shaking his head in amazement because he remembers me 18 years ago when I was 18, a little skinny, scrawny freshman, going into college, and just as he's thinking about where I came from and where I am now, and then he was talking about how long he's been pastoring and how long he's been preaching, and I was talking about how long I've been preaching, and we were sharing and remembering the timeline of just how long we've been in this, and I was talking about, it's been 23 years for me that I've been preaching now. And after 23 years of preaching, my brothers and sisters, I still don't have it all figured out. And my pastor was saying after 30 plus years of preaching, he still doesn't have this all figured out. That we're still trying to wrap our minds around what God is doing in the world around us. We're still trying to wrap our minds around what God is doing, even in our own lives. We're still trying to wrap our minds around where God is leading us and calling us to lead the church. It's still a process of figuring it out, my brothers and sisters. The two-step miracle is a way of reminding us, my brothers and sisters, that we don't figure this thing out. The first, if I can break this down. The church, by and large, the Christian church has a way that it understands who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. Right? And one of the difficulties we have is understanding that the grace that Jesus gives us is not just for us. We are really good at talking about amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. What's harder for us is to realize that that same grace is available to people who are not me, or people who do not hang out with me. It's easy for me to receive God's grace for myself. It's harder for me to give it to other people. And it's a place where it's hard for us to see the way Jesus is working. And it bothers me, my brothers and sisters, when people can, in the name of Jesus, be mean to others, or talk down to others, or condemn people to hell as if we are not all people who have sin in our lives. If we are not all saved only because of the grace of God. Or if all the grace ran out when we got saved. My brothers and sisters, that God has an amazing capacity for love and grace for the whole world, but we miss it because we're so busy trying to be Christians that we forget to look and see what Christ really did. My brothers and sisters, that we have these notions about who Christ is and what Christ is about that sometimes don't really coincide with what Jesus did. I just believe sometimes, my brothers and sisters, if we saw Jesus hanging out with the crowd of people that he hung around, with people who were known for lying and stealing, with people who had bad reputations, people who were cast out, who couldn't hold down jobs, my brothers and sisters, if we saw Jesus in our time, we would think that Jesus wasn't a Christian because of who he hung around. Because we have these notions of who Jesus is, and we have so sanitized Jesus in our minds and our imaginations, my brothers and sisters, that we miss what God is doing. And the challenge or the difficulty is not just that we miss what God is doing, but there's a secondary issue. Because it's not just the disciples who are having problems trying to understand what Jesus is doing in their midst. It's the world. It's the world around them that is trying to understand who Jesus is, and they can only understand Jesus based on what they have experienced. They've experienced, they've heard the stories of Elijah and have read about the prophecies of Elijah. And so they've seen that. They've seen John the Baptist, and they've experienced that. So they can only understand Jesus as their experience gives them the ability to. And without another way of understanding it, they are missing who Jesus really is, my brothers and sisters. And we are living in a world today that is missing who Jesus is because they can only make associations with who Jesus is based on what they've experienced. And so when they experience hurt in the church, then they assume that that's who Jesus is. When they experience rejection in the church, then they assume that's who Jesus is. When they experience judgment in the church, they assume that's who Jesus is. When they feel unloved and unwelcomed in the church, they assume that's who Jesus is. And so we have a group of people who do not care about or who are actively have animosity towards the church, not because they have animosity with God, but because they don't understand who God is. Because the only vision they've got from God is the messed up vision that came because they were hurt in somebody's church. see Jesus for who Jesus is, then it's got to begin with us taking a second look at who Jesus is. It begins with us taking a second look at what Jesus has done. It begins with us taking a second look at what God has done for us and thinking about how we can translate what God has done for us for somebody else. My brothers and sisters, we've got to take a second look. I believe if we would take another look, we would remember, my brothers and sisters, that some of us have been hurt in churches before. Some of us have been talked about in churches before. Some of us have been treated as if we were unwelcomed or unloved. But God has brought us to a place where we see church differently because we took another look. Some of us have been in messed up situations before, my brothers and sisters. Some of us have been in places where we've been hurt and we've been mistreated, my brothers and sisters, but we've been able to come to God and take another look and see what love really is. Some of us have experienced deep sadness and depression, my brothers and sisters. Some of us have experienced deep sorrow in our lives, but God did not leave us there. We were able to take another look and see what true joy really is. Some of us have stayed awake all night worrying about what was going to happen tomorrow or the next week. Some of us have had sleepless nights where we could not, we were wondering how we were going to get out of this situation, how we were going to make it, my brothers and sisters. But God allowed us to take another look so we could experience what true peace was like. My brothers and sisters, we were able to take another look and see what God is doing in our lives. And because we've been able to take another look, my brothers and sisters, we ought to now take another look at how we treat our neighbors. We ought to take a look at how we treat our co-workers. We ought to take a look at how we talk to the people around us, my brothers and sisters, because their only experience of God may be the interaction they have with you. And they need to be able to take another look at God. And it happens when we take another look at what God has done for us. And in light of that, take another look at our actions. My brothers and sisters, we have a practice we call response to the word. It's our way of acknowledging that God is not just speaking to me because I'm the one up here with the microphone, but that God is speaking to and wants to speak through each and every one of us.